All right. How's it going, guys? And welcome to our newest edition of Zwischenraum podcast. We hope you've made yourself comfortable and are as excited about today's talk as we are. Your host today will be Vanessa and me. And before we start, we would like to ask you to put your microphones on mute. And if you have any questions or inputs, if you scroll down the sidebar, there's a channel with today's date where you can put it all in during the talk. And in the end, we're going to have another Q&A round. One important information is that today's talk is going to have video stream, so make sure to tune in. And and before I forget, we got premiere today because today's talk is going to be fully in English. So make yourself comfortable and enjoy. And yeah, now I'll pass or hand over the microphone to Vanessa, who will introduce our guest today.
Yeah, hi everybody. You can also put your questions in German and then we do some English thing that will work as well. So I have the honor to introduce our guest today, Ted Davis. Ted is currently a teacher of mine at FHNW Basel and involved in a number of super cool projects around creative coding, from books to AR posters. He's part of the local collective Basel Codes, and you can check the whole CV if you're interested. I was lucky to have 2 courses with Ted, which were outstanding because 1, I learned a lot in a short amount of time. 2, Ted managed to invite badass female guests to both of the courses. And 3, there was a party with live coding. So these are the facts that I consider important. Hi, Ted.
Hello, Vanessa. Hello.
You want to add something?
Sure. No, thank you for the introduction. I'll add that also in the Q&A we can do Denglisch. Kann gern auf Deutsch Frage stellen. Bei meiner Präsentation ist es einfach besser für alle auf Englisch. So my presentation is much better, smoother to follow in English, but I welcome questions in German as well.
Great. Then we can directly jump into the stream, I guess.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Yep, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Hello to those watching this asynchronously. And interesting, it's also a podcast. And so let's see, you can see. Yep. I'm curious, those who will listen to this, I'll have to be sure to talk about what we're seeing and what you aren't seeing. Like a Mitch Hedberg album. Okay. Hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yes.
Quick check. Awesome. Yeah. So what I wanted to share today was sort of this domain of creative coding. Since a while now, I like to call it create live coding, because the last couple of years I've gotten obsessed in that direction. But primarily on the emphasis of making tools, because that's an area of creative coding that I find super fun. Is that as a designer, we can make these little tools that do maybe one thing for us, or provide a small solution versus tools that can do everything, but then maybe nothing, or limit how much we could do. So the first tool I want to introduce, because a bunch of you are visual communication backgrounds, in case you're not in the know or haven't heard about this, is Bazel.js, which is a project that started around 2012, when one of our bachelor students was interested to work for their thesis on the Martian Chronicles. And in InDesign, they were hoping to program and were really curious, how could they make a visual for aliens, essentially. And no one in our institute knew how to code within InDesign. We had heard about it, but nobody had experience. But we were aware of the project of Benedikt Gross and Julia Laub, who had focused in Schwäbisch Gmünd on the topic of programming within InDesign. And so a colleague, Ludwig Zeller, had invited Benedikt to come give a workshop for us in InDesign programming. And in the train and process of preparing the workshop, realized it needed so much code to just make something small happen on the document. You had to set up the page settings, all kinds of preferences, and then you could start to draw. And so figured out that there was this project, Processing JS, which was sort of a way that you could move from processing, this great tool in Java for artists, designers to creative code, and bring your sketches into the browser. And there was a lot of code from that project that could find its way into this API, basically, for InDesign, because you can talk to InDesign in a number of ways, but one of them is with JavaScript in the background. And so made this little kind of demo of how something like that could work. It worked really well in the workshop. And then we extended working on it as a team. We have a 2.0 that's been coming soon since forever. I'm greatly responsible for that lag, but it will come out. I can share a link to how you can play already with 2.0 since a while, because all kinds of new features came and things were fixed. But basically, what is Bazel.js? It gives us this great ability to control everything within InDesign programmatically. And what makes that really unique to other environments is that InDesign has all kinds of typographic control, and you have these multi-page capabilities. And so that makes it unique to other environments where you might be doing creative coding, is that you really can go and do micro typography and control everything per paragraph, line, word, character. And then it starts to get really interesting when you start pulling data from the internet and creating generative design, having things appear on the page because of whatever data you're pulling and what those numbers were. So this was our teaser video, and I'll just kind of give a director commentary over it. This was a sketch from processing that was converted to work inside of our environment in JavaScript. And then what's so cool in this environment is whatever you created sits on the page. It's just shapes, elements in an InDesign document that then you can go and fix or correct by hand or apply even more code to. And so it lets you play in this really interesting space where you create stuff completely generatively and they appear on the page, or you first make things on the page and then start to manipulate them with code. Kind of like how ActionScript was, if anyone played with Flash years ago. You really get to play in this, I don't have to think in a weird way by code and have it appear. I can sort of augment my design with extra code. So I think I'll leave that behind. I can pass the link to the teaser video where there's also audio commentary. I'll show you a couple projects that have come out over the last few years. These from master's students at our institute who redesigned the book Animal Farm using data from around the internet. So this was showing on one page the happiness index, which kind of had some typical graph styles, bar graphs, circular graphs. And they kind of went through the book and applied this data visualization to the book. So this was about the freedom index, but then they started to have the actual contents of the story. And here, if I get up close, it's about people's access to safe water. This was about working hours average per person in looking at here 2 different countries. This was about censorship, looking at 2 different countries. And they started to do these typographic manipulations to the text based on this data that they were importing. So here you can see a very sped up version of what that looks like. It's not the fastest environment to code or to run stuff within InDesign because everything you do is a really complex object. But as a time lapse, it looks nice and fast. So we're often coding on one side using Sublime Text has a special plugin for it that lets you run the code inside of InDesign. You just have to load this library, Bazel.js, which is free, open source. And again, I'll throw the link in afterwards to the chat. Because you don't want to land on the old website where everything used to have a B dot in front of it. Now we can, thanks to contributions for 2.0, we can skip this B dot. Another project that was made very recently was looking at the gender equality index and looking at various countries and manipulating, playing with their text based on those numbers. And so exploring different methods of data visualization, looking for particular words within the index across a text, and then manipulating typography based on those numbers. Yeah, so here we can see we can break down type into points. We can draw that type in all kinds of different ways, and then they could let the data influence what that type looked like. This was a project from last year, I want to say, 2 years ago, from the BA, exploring lyrics and audio. And so found a script that could basically break down a song and get this analysis of it that we see on the left, and then they could apply those numbers to the lyrics that we see on the right. And so you could really try to maybe like read the lyrics while listening to the song and see if it has that same kind of impact as we see typographically. Or another project that also played with lyrics and analyzing the audio, and also built data visualizations that were contextual to the songs that they were looking at. Or another project from this last year explored using InDesign with thermal printers, which is a really fun technology for getting instant prints. And it's always nice to think about print on demand and what that could mean. And so this was a hamburger generator where it asked for your name and basically how many toppings were you willing to pay for, and then you'd get a generative burger and a price based on those ingredients, which I think is a genius idea that I wait to see in a hamburger place near us. We can do all kinds of weird things. We can use live audio. There's a looping engine that we have in it. So we can do live, like constantly running the code on your document. And this was from a workshop about generative magazine covers. And the person wanted a scream magazine where they would kind of yell and then it would affect all the design just before it went to print. And so this was using processing to listen to our microphone and then constantly passing that value into the script in InDesign. And taking that further, our very first video to show off the library, we made this kind of silly game showing what is possible in this environment. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is a kind of fun area to think about, is what would it mean to build games inside of InDesign for people who need a break from what they're working on, or how could you somehow gamify a design process when you have this ability to constantly interact with the person within the environment. Yeah, so those are just a couple. I'm going to quickly exit just to double check I'm not missing something that I need to be knowing about. Is it all good?
Yes, everything.
Okay.
All good. We're still
Awesome,
here.
awesome. Okay. Yeah, Keynote hides everything. Yeah, I show you a couple posters that I've made using creative coding. This first one is a super old. These are two like really old projects. 2011. I actually don't even have a slide of what the final poster was, but this was for a conference that took place in Basel. And rather than manually figuring out where the type should go, at the time I was using PHP a lot as my coding platform of choice based on my thesis project. And I was building web tools and I'd learned PHP and thought it was just fun to just move the type around randomly and let the computer decide some of those positions and just keep refreshing until I found a combination that surprised me or was somehow interesting, and I had to be a human and say, I like that one. In the lower right, we see a tool, a really primitive tool for like one of the first courses I taught that was about making generative design tools. And it was just sticking a scanner inside a box with a foot pump just to blow shapes around and have it automatically scan every couple seconds just to see what a random generator kind of looks like in an analog form. And so random is a big thing we can play with, but it's not totally random because like in this example, the type, the build always stays at the top, communication, median stays somewhere in the middle, and it's still making some decisions, but letting the computer make others with the hope it surprises you. This was a poster made in processing, where for years I've been obsessed with visual feedback, this idea that you can take a picture of what the output is and feed it back in on itself, just because it has the ability to create things that I would have no idea how to create elsewise in any other software, because it's sort of scaling it, maybe slightly shifting it, and ends up building artifacts and levels of complexity that I don't know how to do with other tools, Illustrator, Photoshop, other design tools that we would tend to use. And so this was sort of a screen recording of playing with the tool, where I basically had just the outlines of the type, and I kind of used the mouse to move it back and forth, and then just created like probably a few hundred outputs, constantly just setting up a key that took a screenshot. So anytime playing with creative coding, can't stress enough, add the little bit of code. So you press a key and it takes a screenshot of what you're doing, just to constantly save those outputs, because you never know at what point in that process the best thing happened, because it's kind of always just moving forward. What happens if? What happens if? What happens if? And so then here we can see it started to shift into a direction that I kept kind of getting obsessed with, and then saying, okay, I should drift a little bit to that side, a little bit to that side, and just had to run it tons of times until I was then happy with what I got on the right side. Hot off the press from the end of summer was a collaboration with Martin Golenbeck for a poster about an exhibition called Die Zukunft hat sechs Beine, the future has six legs, and had the idea that we should play with an AR poster. And so this was, it's always fun finding new territory to look into technique-wise, and learning that our cell phones have gotten powerful enough. Open source libraries have appeared that let us play with AR within the browser. And so we don't need to download any app, which can be really great, really smooth, but it's tricky to ask the visitor of a poster to download something if they don't already have it. And here they could scan a QR code or just go to the website and start playing with their cell phone right away, the camera, and see these generative bugs. And so these are bugs created with P5.js and Hydra, which I'll talk about in a bit. And yeah, gave this extra layer to a poster. Shameless self-promotion. In winter, February 6th to 10th, I believe, we'll be giving a winter workshop on this topic of generative AR posters here at the Institute. So I'll drop a link for that as well after. I'm going to quickly, yeah, I think we're okay for time. Topic. Sure. Yep. I was wondering if I should skip glitch or come back to it in a bit, but I'll go through it and then go to P5. So glitch was maybe a way that I got into creative coding. It was this, like while I was doing my master's, was really curious about digital images versus analog images, and the fact we're using all these analogies from the analog world for digital, and we're calling things canvases, and what would happen if we tried opening up a picture in a text edit. And so did that and saw this weird stuff, started making these weird experiments of replacing stuff and testing what that would mean. Was interested in like, what is a digital file? How can we tell something is digital? And started realizing that these mistakes and errors that appear are kind of like a window that we can either see right through the medium, or there's a crack and we say, there's a window blocking the landscape from us, or whatever picture we're thinking of. We don't just see the content, we suddenly say, this is a JPEG, this is a digital file. Digital files have these surfaces and structures. I won't go too deep into this bit. This is more when getting to give a class once a year on the topic of glitch, which is so much fun for just intentionally breaking digital files and seeing what happens when you kind of push them in special ways that they don't just break, but reveal artifacts and qualities of them. So with the JPEG specifically early on, I was just kind of poking each data byte and then found this really interesting region called the quantization table. I'll just say a given byte has all these possibilities, 256 possibilities, and I started manually making a whole lot of saved files, a bunch of different files, tweaking that number to see what would happen to this file. So I would make 256 copies of the picture and tweak that same byte, going a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And it would take forever to do this by hand. And then started using a keyboard macro where I could record myself doing it once and kind of play it back. And then eventually learned with a bit of PHP, I could kind of do that process by code. And then years later, with processing, found out I could, with a couple more lines of code, I could open up all the frames of the animation, these 15 frames, and manipulate those bytes with a script, save all those pictures, and see this thing moving in a way that I'd always wanted to, but would have taken way too long to process. And so this was with processing, where I could sort of run that stuff as a native app and save all those pictures, and then had to use things like FFmpeg and ImageMagick to convert the images and build a movie out of it. And now it's crazy how fast our machines have gotten, how fast the browser is, that I've recently kind of recreated this with P5.js in the browser, and I can in real time look at those 15 frames and on the fly change the values of the image while I'm looking at it. And so it's sort of like all this work of saving pictures, building movies can now just render in real time because everything has gotten so fast and strong. I'm gonna actually, just really quick. I mean, it's this idea of making tools was a big part of this thesis, where I was playing with the idea of putting like text inside of a picture, movie data inside of a picture to see what would happen. And this was like my realization that I need to make tools to test out all the possibilities. If I make a tool and put it out there, this is called text to image, then I could let anyone type in this text box, put that text inside of the image, which causes a glitch and sort of shows us these strange pixels. And then I could see way more possibilities than I would ever think to type into such a box. And so in my thesis back then, it was about making multiple tools to let people explore this process that I was doing by hand. It was partially being efficient for myself to test out lots of possibilities, but then a lot just to see how would other people play with these kind of workflows if you make a really small little tool that does one thing. This was similar but different, basically letting people manipulate what's called the header, the information about the picture and how it's displayed. But I'll skip that and pass that link later. It's been super fun teaching Glitch. Once a year, I give a class where I walk people through how to break down JPEGs and then encourage them to go find a format of choice and become experts of it. And so it helps us like discover old formats from the 90s or 80s that are long forgotten, but we can still access, or look at future formats that are in development still and figuring out how do they break in really interesting ways if we sort of push those values in their data. And along that process, it's also about making tools for people to explore that. So this is something called Hexploder, where you feed it a file and it basically just builds copies of the file while breaking one of the bytes. Not breaking, but like pushing. It sets one of those bytes at a time to its max value just to see, did something happen? And it sort of lets you explore where an interesting part of the picture is to play with. So here we can see each of those outputs just kind of walking one byte at a time through the data. And it can kind of help someone pinpoint the most interesting spot of a file to play with. And so it's really fun to make these tools to help people get into this stuff. And then every year I have the problem that somebody updated their laptop or their operating system and all the stuff stops working, which is super frustrating. And then you have to try to rebuild it or try to fix it or try to patch it. and have to also be on a newer computer to make that happen, or tell them, I'm sorry, it just won't work. And that kind of pushed me to go more and more into the browser, saying, okay, what if we kind of view the glitches in the browser, because the operating system was starting to censor glitches. Like Apple Preview wouldn't show you the glitch if you made it, it would just show gray from that point on. So instead we could sort of do weird things by making custom tools or working in the browser. Or I started to realize as well, the browser is so powerful. We could make a tool to sort of open up files and manipulate them. The browser has this thing called Canvas, which is like the playground for working with media in it. So if you've ever played with like 3JS or P5 or Hydra or Paper.js, a lot of these creative coding frameworks are playing with this element called the canvas, which is this multimedia space that's part of HTML5. And it has all kinds of wild possibilities. It lets you open up, you can put a file in there and you can access its bytes. And so that led to this tool called p5.glitch, where we can open up a file, or we can use our webcam, because basically a webcam is just a whole series of images back to back to back to back. And we can grab one of those pictures, manipulate the bytes as many times as we want. Here I'm using my mouse X and Y to control where in the file it should break it while looking at it, or if it should grab new frames or just keep playing with those existing frames. And it opens up these other possibilities, because now we can also do this glitching in the browser anywhere. So one way of applying that was to the museum, our neighbor Heck, Haus für elektronische Kunst. And for 1 month, I built a tool that let you glitch any part of their website, because it was the start of lockdown. And they have this great glitch facade from media group Bitnik on the outside of their building, but everyone was in lockdown at home. And so people would be looking at websites instead of going to physical spaces, and realized I could basically, anything on the website, I could turn it into a mini canvas and then use this glitching library to let you glitch that thing. There's a picture of that glitch facade being glitched for double glitch. Unfortunately, it doesn't remix back to normal. Yeah, so this was like an installation for 1 month on their website, and then it became a plugin, an extension for Chrome called glitch.ext, and lets you go and then glitch anything on the web. And there's multiple formats that you could glitch between. It's basically what the browser allows. WebP is one of these new formats that's really interesting and collapses, kind of like a waterfall. Or here's a JPEG glitch, for example. There's the WebP. Okay, hope I'm not being too motor mouthy. Been a long day. I wanted to show you all these things. And now we can slow down a little bit and show you P5 Live, which is this domain of live coding, and where I've been spending a bunch of time the last couple of years is building a tool to really explore and play with what live coding can be in the browser, starting for the VJ environment thoughts, and then has become more and more about education. And so what is P5 Live? This started in 2019, and we started a group called Basel Codes with former students, alumni, and we hosted a processing community day in Basel, because they had this initiative where they had some processing community days in LA and New York, and then they encouraged people around the world to host one. And so we had talks and workshops and a party. And some of our Basel Code members are musicians and DJs. And so we thought, yeah, let's have a big party at the end of the day. We should have visuals. We should have coded visuals. And then it's a question, how do you live code visuals? Because we had heard about algo raves, hadn't attended one, but knew this was a thing that, especially in the music domain, people are performing with code and showing the code and creating it on the fly. And it was also happening for visuals. But this idea that the code doesn't have to happen and then you have the output, the idea that you see the process, that it's really transparent and you're like with the person while they're making what you see, and it could go amazingly or it could go horribly. It could be a bug and nothing is working. It's a lot of pressure. Who knows what will happen? So at the time, I was playing primarily with processing because I was teaching that a lot, and a lot of the libraries that I was using were in this environment, but had no idea how one could build on top of this to be able to like see the code and see the visuals at the same time. Forget why I brought up this processing JS. Because of iterations of processing. It takes a little while to load from archive.org. But processing is this amazing tool that's been around now just over 20 years. I guess the page isn't going to load. There was this great initiative to bring those processing sketches into the browser by converting Java into JavaScript so it could run in the canvas. And this normally works. There we go. It's amazing. This thing works within an iframe. So it let you show your processing sketches on the web, but there were all kinds of issues of like Java and JavaScript kind of colliding. And then in 2012, real quick, another shameless promotion, use that processing JS for my website back in the day. This is from 2014, where as a tool, it was somehow very important to give people a VJ mode. I wanted my website to be a tool, and I was very optimistic that people would go and maybe perform with this thing. So I'll quickly show you. We can warp into things, and there was kind of this fading out into one color. So if there's ever too much of one color, we can switch between colors or types of design. It would fade to the next color. Yeah, still potential to VJ with this thing. At first, I hope people would tell me that they VJ'd, but I never got any emails about that. Anyways, 2012, 13, Lauren McCarthy released P5.js, which was sort of rethinking the processing project in the browser with JavaScript. And it got really, really powerful the last years with tons of contributions, and it could do 3D sound using the webcam, kind of everything you would want, and working within the browser. And so in the browser is an environment that I was really familiar with and could imagine building a tool. I'd seen tools like Hydra, this amazing modular video synthesis that is working with shaders in an abstract way. And I couldn't believe that the browser could handle this kind of stuff. Little did I know how efficient shaders are, but was just like, wow, we could do live visuals and we can have code in the browser. Let's see what's possible. And so that led to creating this tool called P5 Live, which is basically the canvas element full screen in the background to see the output from P5, a text editor sitting on top of it that you code on, and then P5 Live is letting you save sketches, import, export. It lets you co-code with each other, which we can open up in the background. We can recode. This is a whole new fancy thing that we can record what we're doing so that we can, almost like a player piano, track our process and go back and remix ourselves from somewhere in the process. A lot of things. This is what it looked like that very first party. We had 3 projectors, 3 computers, and encouraged people to code behind the DJs or on the ceiling or the side if they wanted to kind of warm up a sketch, and then we could transfer it to the main display. But it was interesting. There was a lot of anxiety for people about like, what if I cause a bug? What if it stops working? What if I need to look something up? Because you don't want to suddenly have a really bright white screen looking up the references for something. And so that led to these different aspects. Like right now, I'm inside of P5 Live, have a presentation inside of this, and so I can show you real quick. There's something called the references right there, and so you can look up all the code you might need, and maybe in a VJ performance, they might not notice that you go and look up like, what is rect mode again? Oh yeah, and then you can quickly close it, and nobody saw you do that. I've performed with it a number of times, collaborating with musicians here, Dasha Elena, at No School Nevers, really fun summer school in France, over the summer, and she was sending me OSC, open sound control messages from pure data. And then I was live coding those changes. And this is the aspect of co-coding, which I'm now working on like a better visualization of what that means. But at the same time, we were so used to things like Google Docs or Etherpads to collaborate with one another before the pandemic, that I was really curious, what happens if we coded together and had the same visuals sitting behind us? And so that became something called co-coding, which kind of looks like this, but I'll, I think, skip the demo a bit because we can do this instead together. I'm going to jump ahead a bit and just show you how it's been useful in teaching. Like during the lockdown times, we could sit, if we wanted to, 27 people inside of this space. Again, this is what co-coding looks like, that we're all there and we can chat and we can code together. And if I need to, I can lock the room so that there aren't bugs being introduced all at once. But it's also fun to just leave it open and see what happens. In a few weeks, towards the end of November, I'll do a live coding performance where I'll invite anyone to come and join and code along on 2 different machines. And we'll see how long we make it without bugs, or if the whole time it's just bugs. We'll see. And we can also do really crazy, weird things like hook up to serial devices. This was going to be a workshop with alumni Florian Kaiser about these split flaps from the SPB. And then a lockdown forced us to stay home, and we figured out that we could have a live stream from YouTube in the background behind our code, and then our code could be talking to these devices, and only he would receive the messages on the devices. So we'd be sending what are known as serial commands, and then seeing the updates a quarter second after they were being sent. It was really wild. It was kind of fun having these limitations, not being able to meet physically, and then discovering weird ways that we can remotely collaborate with each other out of necessity. Yeah, so there's all kinds of features in there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and show you this. This is the environment. I'll just quickly demonstrate what this means and looks like and what live coding means. So here I could just say, I want an ellipse that follows my mouse X and my mouse Y and 150. And I get that shape. And one of the big things this has is soft compiling, I call it. So if I change numbers and type them quick enough, then it doesn't have to refresh everything. It kind of just updates our draw, which gives us this ability to kind of 0-5, kind of explore and play on the fly of testing out changing numbers. What if this is 25? Then it's a less of a trail that's being left behind. We're just kidding. I want a trail. I'll say fill, it is 255. What if I do random 255 and just get to test things out, or I turn that off and now it's stuck at that color. Gives us this ability. Maybe while I'm demonstrating these things real quick, I'll show you this thing called recoding, which is this thing I've always wanted. I mentioned this ability to play back and remix yourself. And so I hit record, and I'm just gonna start doing a little bit of code, that same code I had. I'll change the number. I'll give us a background. I think there might be a question out there.
Hey, sorry,
So-
Michi, kannst du dich muten?
So now I've added some random color. I'll take out one of those to be a solid RG. The green is now solid on. I'll bring back some size. And then I'll say, why not? Let's go WebGL into 3D mode and start drawing with a sphere. Ooh, that's a little crazy. Let's turn that down a bit. And have a box in the center. It has a rotate y radians radian count. Just testing out a couple of things. And then I say, okay, that was interesting. I'm going to stop. I need to change this to a different color. Okay. I can stop this recording. I'll say, stop the recording. And then I can go back and play it back to myself. And I see 30 steps of every time this code worked. Right now we can see I was talking for a bit and I wasn't actually coding there. I started to code. And I could say, I am not very patient. The biggest gap could be half a second so that I'm never sitting there and talking. It's just always coding on the fly. And what's really wild is I'm still interacting with the code as it's being played back to me. So it's this this interesting ability to sort of run the code once, make it happen, and then maybe the way you interact with it is really crucial. And so you could play it back and interact with it a different way. Or you eventually say, I want to jump right to one of those steps, like that was a great step. Aha, there I had no fill active, and then I say, give me a fill of 255, just kidding, that's the same value, 150. And now I'm like remixing that recording somewhere in the middle and say no stroke, and let's have lights. And now we can see something like that. Yeah, I can export these things and pass them to each other. And this is something that I really have to explore is like, what does this mean, this ability to record and play it back to ourselves? So I'll just call this a demo. I'm going to start a co-coding session and we can both have a Q&A and hang out there while coding. And the way this works is I'm going to, oh no, I'm on the local host. Haha, just kidding. P5 Live works online and offline. I made it so that you could work without an internet connection on a train in a basement without internet. And that's the offline version, which I use all the time. But online, it's just p5live.org. And then I can start a co-coding session. And I'll just first say, hello there. And I'll lock the room or lock the code just so we don't quickly break. And I have to figure out with Discord where that window went to get it back. Where did that window go?
Did you minimize it?
I think that's a great possibility. Oh. Yep, there we go. I'm going to throw this into the chat for here.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One additional thing, there's a really nice cheat sheet in P5 and also lots of demos. So if you're afraid to start, you can just start copying and changing stuff. Yeah, great input. Yeah, if I'm gonna on my local version go back to the demos down here in the demos. When you first go to P5 Live, there's all kinds of demos to show you how you could do audio visualization, how you could make a poster in this environment, how you play with 3D stuff. I'll say, okay, for the offline version, whoops. Playing with 3D shapes, playing with GUI elements. Using other libraries is really important, that we could introduce other libraries within P5.js. And really fun is getting into things like Hydra, which is this amazing way of playing with shaders that we can combine the two to do some really getting the best of what P5 can do and what it's capable of, and all of the fancy, wild things that Hydra is capable of doing with a few lines of code is nuts.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
May I just shortly ask if there, because you just were talking about we can like make an preview test of it together. Is there anything to get into the language of the code you use there?
Yeah, definitely. Let me just make this thing move on its own while we're hanging out times 10. So now we can just control the height of it. Yeah, how to get into P5. Lots of ways, lots of resources out there. Maybe one I would really recommend is jumping on the coding train. The coding train has tons and tons of videos and tutorials to get into both processing and especially P5. For the last couple of years, it's been focused on P5. And so this is a great way to get into it. I can pass a link, I think. I'll have to check if this online or topics. I can pass you my notes for when I teach P5. I'll throw this in the chat. Let me go down to chat where I have links to that and more. Getting into P5.js. And there I go into some of the basics. It's like the teaching material that I have, how to react to audio, how to play with classes. Although I do have resources there. Jumping to just a handful of so many things that are out there. I'll have to see if this list is up to date or not. But something that I also hand out is a cheat sheet. It can be nice just to have a small cheat sheet to see what are the primitive shapes I could draw, how do I style them, how do I play with type. And then I would recommend to go to the demos. All right, somebody changed already the speed of it.
Nice.
Try to align. Yeah. No, it was almost right. Let's put it back. You had a line, and here the only problem is that with a line we need an x1, y1, x2, y2. We need a fourth value. So let's say 0. And then we have another problem. A line is by default black, and we have a black background. So we need a white stroke. And then it should work. Where is it? We have rotate Y. This is unfortunately breaking because that's for the 3D mode. There we go. Now it's working. Yeah, this rotate Y is only if we're in WebGL mode. Otherwise, we have other kinds of rotation. Yeah, so while playing, if things are breaking, hopefully it tells you why it's breaking. In a browser, you have something called a JavaScript console that you can open up, Command Option J in Chrome. And here it told me those messages saying, rotate Y has to be WebGL mode. It tried to tell us a few times, but I wasn't listening to it. Yeah.
From all your experience over the years, I would like to ask if people are afraid of coding, do you have any advice for them how to actually get into it? I mean, we saw all those references, all those cheat sheets and tutorials, but I think for the one or other, coding is still like an obstacle to get into it. Do you have any piece of advice for people starting coding?
Yeah, I think 3 bits of advice. One, it's super hard to break something. So like, it's hard, but have to let go of that fear of, I'm going to break it. I have to be careful, I'll break it. And of course, it could stop working. But in the best case, it still kind of works, or it's a happy accident. Then I'm going to fade it out. So it's like, if I misspell something, it stopped working, but it's trying to tell me something at the bottom. So maybe if I'm lucky, I can figure out what that was. And of course, it's like this live coding is kind of improvising with what one knows. So that could be limiting of like, how do I get into that to begin with? And there, I think remixing and learning from existing sketches is super helpful, just to see how is something made. And so I'll just quickly show you, like in the demos down there, I will, or actually rather in another tab, I'll open up a demo that's just doing a little math thing, just kind of moving around. And I can't recommend enough to just change numbers and see what happens. On all the demos, you can't break them. They're read-only. So if I change a value and say, what if I put 5? then it's going faster back and forth, and it cloned the sketch. So it's a copy of it. So I can just test out things. I could say, what if it was 0.05? It's going way slower. What if it was 0.005? Now it's going really slow. So remixing, I think, is a big part of it. Just trying things and knowing that you can't break it. And there was a third thing that I totally forgot. Taking a class. Now, I mean, to get into code, I'm a huge proponent of taking a class, a workshop for that very first input, because it really helps to have someone who can like answer the issue as it happens when something breaks, or help point out the basics. But then when you get into code, it's totally self-learning. Like once you have the basics of the syntax and where to find information, the references to like, where do I even start to look? How do I self-learn? It's all about that. And so, yeah, it helps to have that initial input, and then it's endless. For every single time I'm coding, I'm constantly having tabs open and looking for stuff. How does something work? Or I'm also opening up the references myself all the time because I forget the details about stuff. Hope that helps.
Totally. And that brings me actually to another question, actually, how you got into creative coding at all. And did you also start with some classes, or did you learn it all by yourself? What's your story behind it?
Yeah, it was like, I thought I knew how to code or so. Like in junior high, I was shown how to make a website. Early internet, I'm dating myself. But it was like early internet, and a math teacher told me to copy their website and change stuff. So that same idea of remixing. And so I copied their website, changed the pictures, text, and kind of learned how websites worked, and did that for years and thought I was coding until I learned later that's HTML and CSS and such. That wasn't really coding. And then doing my master's in Basel, took a class that taught us ActionScript. So I got a taste of what was possible in a generative way with that. And then there was a course I didn't take that was about using JavaScript, MySQL. It was about making fancy web pages, and I didn't take it because I was ignorant and thought, I know how these work. I know how to copy paste a snippet of code from the web. And instead, I took a poster class. But I was really happy that the person put their notes online. And so, not taking the class, I could read all the notes about how to connect to a MySQL database, how to use JavaScript to talk to that stuff. And it was sort of like I could read and follow their tutorials along the way. And I learned kind of a lot of the PHP stuff from that. And that's why when teaching, I always make sure that there's a website kind of thing that breaks stuff down that you can go and refer to. Because I think it's great to have the person live in front of you was necessary. And then it's also necessary to, at your own pace, look through and try things out. And then other code, I think, is a mixture of workshops and tons of searching on the internet and Stack Overflow and finding someone who's done something that you're curious about and remixing it and learning from it. Yeah, so for things like Bazel.js, that project that I showed at the beginning of my coding experience at the time was really not that far. So I couldn't contribute that much to the actual code base. I worked more on lessons and on the website and could contribute bits and pieces here and there. But then it wasn't until like working on 2.0 that I could contribute more, because 5 years later, I'd played with JavaScript that much more and could work on it.
Great, thank you very much. Just to ask around, do you guys have any questions? You can even put your mic on if you want to, or just put it in the...
You can ask in German if you want to.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Say again.
I would just start with one question that interests me is, if you know what kinds of possibilities there are, what the output of the coding is. So how to scale it up, maybe vectorize it in some sense, or is it possible to get it into print and to like have it in a better quality, like a pixel image?
Yeah, great question. One of the examples that I have, I mean, it's unique to every environment. So there's so many different really interesting frameworks out there for coding. So I'm a big advocate of processing and P5 because with so little code, you can get so many things happening. And then in processing, I think there are libraries to export vector graphics. It's a bit less so in the browser with P5, but then I have an example here called Canvas Poster, which basically demonstrates how we can draw on a much larger layer. We can make a layer that we say is huge. I could go even bigger, draw to that layer, and then just show it to myself at the end, scaled down. So right now, this layer is A0 at 72 dpi. And I'm just looking at it small, but it's much bigger. Or for that example with the bugs, that's not the name of the folder. Where was that folder? Bug simulator. Here's that poster kind of made in P5, testing it out. And then I made a button or a feature called production. And if I set that to true, then I'll go down a ways. If production is true, bug export. There, I set the pixel density to 12. So I said, pretend that the screen is 12 times bigger than it actually is. And I could only run that because I'm using a fairly new laptop that this M1 chip is like, I can throw anything at it and it can render it in the browser. So it's you have to be careful when making something fancy if you put it on the internet, because maybe it's not going to run as fast for everyone. But it lets me use the browser more and more as like the production environment, because I could run this thing if I really wanted to at 12 times the scale, save a picture, and then I was able to save pictures that were like 15,000 pixels by something or other at 300 dpi. Does that sound like very much? Yeah, 15,000. Yeah. It was enough that we could print a world format poster with really high resolution of these bugs.
Amazing. Thanks.
I have a comment on that because at the Weltformat Symposium, I saw a talk of Tonic, and they were also working a lot with creative code for their campaigns, especially for one festival. And they were really struggling, not with the size, but with the RGB colors. Because they wanted to print it, and they wanted that it looks like everywhere the same. So they were trying to make the process better and to make the colors look the same. But in one case it was more or less successful, and in the other they used fluorescent colors to make it really poppy, which worked like for 1 week, and then they were totally worn out because of the light from the sun.
Okay. Yeah, and then it's interesting that one could try to fight the issue and solve it. And supposedly now with digital printing of posters and such, it's like they want an RGB file often because they're using a special ripping software that deals with that. But then it's interesting to try and make that part of the concept that they will all look different. Or with that fluorescent, what happens if it's gonna fade? How could that be part of the design? Yeah, it's sort of like all of these are both problems or fun possibilities.
Yeah, I think they tried to sell it to the client then as part of the concept, but they weren't too happy.
Okay. Yeah, and then it's a question. If it's pixel based and not graphic based, is it? I mean, you could still produce screens from it. That's an interesting library that's out there called P5 Rezo. That is, if you have a risograph machine or access to one, but it's also useful beyond a Rezo, is basically in this P5 environment to be designing with layers in mind. So it's from Sam Levine and Tegabrain, and You could be designing in your bitmap in the browser with different channels, basically. And then one option is to send that to the Rezo, or you send it to Silkscreen, and you're designing with screens in mind. Other questions? Gibt's noch Fragen?
We have two questions actually from Justus in the channel. He's asking, could you please send the links to the glitch code web pages and the add-on?
Sure. Yeah.
And the other question is, and could you please send a link to the workshop in February you mentioned?
Yeah.
So definitely the crave for more promotion.
Definitely.
And lots of heart eye emojis.
Yes.
Just sent the glitch. Yep. And I believe it is baselwinterworkshops.ch takes you to the page. And I'll live scroll to this workshop about generative AR posters. Generative AR posters. And this Piezo, yeah, because I have it open, we'll also put that on that p5.piezo.lib. Yeah, I'll try to go through after and add more of these.
Thank you.
Sure.
Vanessa, do you have any more questions? If nobody else have some?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've seen like lots of it before, but it was still super interesting to have like the whole picture and some new things. And I'm super sad that I can't take the Basel GS course, but I will for sure look into the like documentation and what my classmates are doing there.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge aspect, is having people who just learned something teach it to you, like to try and get that exchange of they'll learn it that much better, and then to pick up from each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If there's no more further questions, I think we're ending, or we're nearing near the end of our talk today. First of all, Ted, thank you very much for being here today and for your amazing talk and your showing your insights into your work for us. It was really, really amazing and interesting.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for the discussion.
And I think if there's no more questions, I think it's time to end the talk for today, to thank Ted for his amazing work on his presentation. And I think it's time for Feierabend, how we say it in Germany. And I think...
Yeah, the channel will remain open with all the links and further information, or if you want to share something you explored, so feel free to drop your stuff anytime. Sorry, Nakan. Didn't want
everything all right. And so I would like to thank everybody who attended our today's talk, and I think we can all wish you a good night and nice evening. Thank you very much, and until the next day, next talk.
Thank you very much, Ted.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.